Let's go into exercise a little bit, and I guess just broad principles. If you're working with a woman in the postpartum stage, in pregnancy, and then prenatal, so kind of went backwards there.
I was like, what?
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, reverse engineering. But
It's like Jesus,
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
like how
let's-
Jesus' birth worked.
So the biggest feedback I get from clients is
Yeah.
like, quite honestly, it's really hard to get or understand what you're supposed to be feeling for with a lot of postpartum style exercise selection if you weren't already exposed to it prior to conception or even just like during pregnancy, right? So one of the big things I look at postpartum is like, first off, let's get clear on what postpartum technically is, right? We're referring to, when you hear that, it's like the Western terminology for the 6 weeks after delivery, which is the time the body requires for the uterus to shrink back down to size. That said, every body is slightly different, so not everyone's organs are going to reorganize themselves that rapidly. So I think that's the one thing we do need to acknowledge is babies are all different sizes, women are all different sizes. So
Yeah, for some women, postpartum is a year.
we'll be looking
2
at,
years,
what vaginal tearing occurred. There's a lot of things that go into that one. But
Torn
when it
buttholes can tear.
There
There's a lot of
is.
stuff that can happen.
So, I mean, that's a part of our reassessment or just like intake form postpartum is like, my male coaches need to be comfortable asking about what level of tearing you had, if you had any, what the healing process looks like and those things. But I'd say the first thing is being able to establish inner abdominal pressure. You'll see it if you go on to any postpartum exercise course, as we talk a lot about dead bug variations and bird dogs. But if you can't stabilize, and now I have you doing extremity movement, we're just feeding into the dysfunction and we're not actually getting any stronger. So I think the first one is like actually being able to train or teach someone what that actually looks like to, pretty similar to like what we would say with like a plank assessment. If someone can't hold a dead bug position or breathe in that without losing lumbar for more than 40 seconds, I'm not going to start increasing a bunch of variations where we're now moving arms and legs because they can't even stabilize long enough to do that correctly. Which postpartum, when you have no feeling of what's going on down there and someone's trying to tell you to engage these muscles, they don't exist.
Yep.
Right? So if you can train that or go through those principles during pregnancy or even again, preconception, at least they have a mind-body connection of what they're trying to get back to, right? And that could take, 6 months before we're like, oh, like I can actually feel stable and strong in this position again. So I'd say like that is the biggest thing that coaches need to get comfortable with is not rushing the process too fast. Because I think it's like, we're like, cool, these are the exercises that we know that are okay. You're postpartum, we're going to be doing bird dogs every day and dead bug variations. But if they can't hold to even go into them, we're missing the mark.
let's say a female client comes to you and she tells you that she is wanting to conceive.
Yeah.
Is there anything at that point in exercise program design you would look for or look to remove in that like preconception phase?
If their lifestyle is balanced, I'm not saying that anything's going to be off during preconception. Absolute strength and structural balance is always going to be number one, especially postural, right? So if you think about what happens when we get pregnant, anterior loading goes up, right? So breasts are going to get larger, bellies are going to get larger, right? So if we don't have really great upper back and postural endurance, the biggest thing we see or complaints out of females is upper back and shoulders, right? Shoulders start rounding forward. We get some lower back pain or sciatic pain just because we didn't have great posterior strength going into it. So I'd say like the number one thing I'm aiming to do is get my females as strong as possible before we get pregnant.
Yeah, it's almost like you look at the most common issues that you know are going to happen postpartum, right? Mm-hmm. It's like there's a lot of things that you have to look at through pregnancy as well, especially with a woman that's already gone through that, right? Like a very simple thing. It's like, what were the biggest challenges for you during your last pregnancy? And they're like, well, my fingers got numb a lot. I put on way more fat than I should have, which put me in a really bad spot postpartum. And that list can go on for a various number of women in various situations. But I think you have to look at like where that woman is going to end up and say, okay, I'm training for that. You know what I mean? Like I'm training for that woman not having any musculature from her breast all the way down to her pelvis. You know what I mean? Like we need to train for that. So I think you hit it on the head when it's like, you know, creating that mind muscle connection. That's impossible to do with someone that hasn't done it before. postpartum, right? So it's like that needs to be like almost overtrained throughout that time, where it's like, I know it's monotonous, but we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this, right? And then when they get to that spot, they're just going to be in that postpartum spot. They might be in a much better spot because their brains know what it's looking for. But if the brain doesn't know what it's looking for, it's going to take a lot more time to organize. I think I feel it. I'm not sure. Melissa, like, what does it actually mean to feel it? Melissa's like, well, she's looking and she's like, well, lumbar is stable, belly button, like, I think you're fine. It'd be easier if it's like, do you feel the same way that you felt 8 months ago? Like, yeah, I feel like I'm getting back to normal.
Quite honestly, I'd say I don't think that half the women that go see pelvic floor specialists would need to do that if they had been trained on what they were supposed to be engaging from the get-go, right? Because that's it, right? Coaches don't feel confident. They don't know what they're looking for. So we send them to a pelvic floor PT, which definitely has its place, but often it's because you just didn't train the client to know what they should be feeling for before they had a child.
Yep.
It's the same thing I'd say, like when we talk about lactation, it's like, cool, you can read a book on how to feed, but now, like, we just had a kid. There's all these overwhelming new emotions, and you're supposed to do something you've even practiced picking up a child to hold into this position, right? So it's like, I hear this over and over again from women. I wish we had spent more time on these pieces before, because in the aftermath, it's too late. It's not too late, but it's like, now there's so many other things going
harder,
on.
right?
It's harder.
Yeah, it's harder.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the problem as well comes from people, coaches, clients, whoever it might be, looking for the solution in, like, what are the best and the worst exercises for this time? And they're not thinking about the principles. What are we preparing for? Where is this client starting with? What does that assessment look like? They're forgetting that stuff, and they're just thinking, oh, we have this condition of pregnancy. Like, what should we and shouldn't we do?
Yeah.
It's kind of a leading question, but are there, like, best and worst exercises through pregnancy?
I'd say yes, especially, so like, I am a big one of pulling out some overhead exercises depending on where we are, right? So we go from first trimester, you have to acknowledge that that's going to be the period in which, if we are going to have a miscarriage, is going to happen. Most women are going to be scared. You have to acknowledge that fear is going to come in, because when you go to the doctor, they're telling you this is the period to be most mindful. You're also going to feel the most fatigued there, right? So if we're going to be susceptible to some injury, it might occur during that first trimester, because we're already fatigued, we're already kind of a little skittish, and now we're trying to do what we were doing before we got pregnant. So that's going to be the first one, is just being mindful of that, and then as we go, you're going to be, as we get to a certain place, we're not going to be able to plank anymore, right? You have to keep it in mind, the amount of weight that's coming down and bearing down on the body. So we'll start pulling out some planks and things like that, but there really isn't. Again, this is why you'll see it with some CrossFit females that continue to train all the way up into delivery. There's nothing that needs to come out if the program design matches the person that's sitting in front of you. I'll always go back to that, is like, take into account who's sitting in front of you, what have you assessed with that person, and does this pattern support what they need and align with their goals, right? Which is, if the goal is to stay feeling good and stay strong throughout pregnancy, like, maybe some of the sexier stuff doesn't even align with their design anymore.
Yeah, I think it's capabilities and risk mitigation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because can a woman that is 7 months pregnant climb a 15-foot rope effectively? Some can, right? Is it worth the risk? I don't know. It would never be for me.
No.
Like, if I'm programming for a 7-month pregnant woman, I would never put 15-foot rope climbs in. But I'm not saying that every woman that does that, that's the wrong thing to do. But I think we always have to weigh, like, the cost benefit, right? It's like, you can do it, but what's the point? You know what I mean?
It's like, what's the value add here? So I always go back to considerations of, like, what's the capabilities of the client? And this is where I just don't believe in some of the courses that are just about modifying some typical stuff we'd see inside CrossFit. It's like, considering why, like, if the woman couldn't do a pull-up in the first place, like, am I really concerned if can she continue to do banded pull-ups during pregnancy? That probably wouldn't be in her design in the first place.